Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell from the Hawthorn Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well and enjoying your fantasy footy preseason for 2022. The good news is the practice games are happening right across this weekend. The official preseason community series is underway next weekend, and we're under 3 weeks away from your 2022 fantasy year getting underway. We thought on this episode of the Coaches Panel, we'd steer away from your salary cap conversations of the game and a real draft focused episode for you. Joining me on this though is, to call him a draft spurt is probably too far, but he's probably best known in the Coaches Panel as the guy that likes drafts the most. I've got Jimmy. Hello, mate. How are you?
I'm all right, MJ. Hello, listeners. I think there's a few of us on the panel that are quite fond of drafts, and I'm certainly no more an expert than anyone else, but this is good fun. Let's have a chat.
Come on, mate. We're meant to sell the hope.
That's it. Follow my advice. You'll win premierships freaking everywhere. There we go.
Thank you, mate. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Yep, that's it. Well worth the price of admission. Patreon.com. Sign up now.
Yeah, thank you. That's the episode, everybody. We'll see you later next week. No, not at all. One of the things that's kind of sets Coaches Panel apart from everybody else is we love to talk about all formats, and I love all game styles as well. Means for you, if you're kind of your fantasy footy diet can't consume all the content and product offerings that are out there, and there are plenty of great ones out there. We've kind of got enough of everything for you to kind of help you through it. It's one of the unique differences about the Coaches Panel. And the other is that Jimmy's on it. But let's talk specifically about drafts on this episode. Even if you're a salary capper, though, I think there'll be some stuff for you. Right at the top, Jimmy, I'm really keen on your perspective on this. In a single season league, how different is the drafting approach and mindset coaches should be heading into their draft day this year in comparison to maybe some previous years?
I guess I don't know that it's necessarily a different approach. I think it's the same sort of thinking, but coming to different conclusions, I guess, in that this year, as with the last couple, there's that kind of that COVID cloud hanging over our head. We don't really know what the season's going to look like from that point of view. So you just got to assume business as usual till we know otherwise. You've got players like, here's your first little tasty tip. Every morning when I wake up, I log into UF and I have a look and see if James Titus has been loaded into the system yet. Because if you've already done your draft, he'd be sitting there as a free agent when he does come. And even if he's there as a restricted free agent, it'll be 24 hours before he's unlocked. So if you get a chance to nab him, do that.
There you go.
And there'll be potentially other COVID top-up players loaded in throughout the year. That's it. So that's one thing, I guess, to keep an eye on. But I think coming into a draft, what I like to do is just sort of have a look at what the depth of players are in each position. Who do I like in the sort of top tier of forwards? Who do I like in the top tier of backs, in the rucks and the mids? And how deep does it go in that before I'm starting to stretch it a bit and go, I'm not real happy with loading this guy as one of my top 1 or 2 in that line, and kind of build your draft around that, I guess. I see a lot of definitive draft ranking spreadsheets come out around this time of year, and it'll categorically say, yes, Petrarca is ranked above Dunkley, or Oscar McInerney is ranked above I don't know, Jake Stringer. And that might well be the case, but from certainly a purely footballing sense, but from a draft point of view, I think on the day, you got to be flexible, and you pick what suits your side, and you don't get caught on a run for the sake of it. And so for me, I like to group those rankings by type of player rather than by, necessarily a single list of this is the order I want to take players in.
Is it almost the vertical and the horizontal drafting all at the same time? A lot of people either choose to do a real linear ranks of, like you say, 1 to 250 as the number. Others go purely on, here are my tier 1 defenders. Here are my tier 1 forwards. Here are my tier 2 mids. But the challenge is, I think somewhere in between is, well, how do you rate a tier 3 mid in comparison to a tier 2 defender or a tier 2
Yeah.
forward? And is that where it kind of sounds like you're saying it without saying it, this horizontal and vertical approach in terms of a rankings is probably a more preferred option rather than one or the other?
Yeah. I think so. That's what works for me, certainly, I guess, is and just being flexible on the day, and that if you've already drafted 6 mids, you probably don't need, the next midfielder if you haven't got many defenders yet. And so if you're looking at that point of view, what adds more value to your team at that point? So I think, being flexible is probably the key thing in that. That's
it's good. I'm curious on your take. We've talked about it a lot through the 50 most relevant around this perceived lack of depth in the forward line, how quickly it falls away. I think the ultimate caveat for every draft, whether it's single season or keeper league, all comes down to the two biggest variances, which is squad sizes and the amount of teams. That really determines and what's on field, probably
hugely.
The third factor. Playing on field with 5 defenders as opposed to 3 defenders, playing with 16 coaches opposed to 6 coaches. Like the variance really blows out drastically.
And absolutely. And the biggest one in that is whether you're playing with 2 rucks on field or 1. And that changes the whole order of everything very, very quickly because there's only so many rucks to go around. And to a degree on that, whether there's a utility spot available or not as well.
That's true too.
As again, another factor to consider in that. But as far as forwards specifically go, it does seem like they're a little light this year, but to me, it's more that there's a lot of high risk, high reward with a lot of them.
At the top of the tree?
Certainly at the top of the tree. And then even in that next sort of tier down, where we talk about players like Taron Thomas at this time of year. And
Butters is probably in the mix of that.
Butters is another one like that. Heaney, Stringer, those sort of second tier ones that have the potential to average at the top tier kind of point, but could quite easily drop you an average of 70 odd for the year. And, you'd look back in 6 months time and go, that doesn't surprise too much. So it's going to be, I think, with most of the forwards, a fair bit of risk and reward from that point of view. So for me, I guess with that in mind, I'm kind of looking at them from a ceiling perspective in that, who's going to help when they do pop, who's going to help more. I hate drafting a guy that you can almost pencil in a 75 for, as a forward or a back at the start of the year and go, yep, he's going to give me about that. Week in, week out, he's scoring 65 to 80. So like that's reliable, and that's all well and good.
That sort of got it like a Papley. Is that the type of player?
Rarely do they hit the 100 mark or anything much over. Rarely are they going to drop you a 50 or anything less, but they're just consistent. I hate that kind of player. I don't want many of them in my team. I want the guys that can pop the big 120. I actually like a quality key forward in my draft team, just so that I've got that capacity to really get a good score, especially if you've got the loopholes enabled.
So you're more talking about chasing the ceiling of a player than the low scoring range. So again, these might not be the right sort of players to contrast them to, but they're probably available in similar price spots on a draft day. Is if a Papley or a Connor Nash is there, would you more look towards the Nash and go, look, he's popped more 90s in a small opportunity in that midfield go he got last year. There's every chance I drop him after round 2. So that's why do you go for because some might go, it's the consistency of scoring that's going to win you your draft day rather than the variance of basement and ceiling. Would you agree with that statement, or are you always chasing ceiling in a draft no matter what?
For the most part, I'm chasing ceiling. And you do want to find those players that others don't value for whatever reason that they might drop that lower score, but it's not likely to be in the 40s. It's not going to really burn you. And if you've got someone else putting up a decent score, at least you get somewhere with it. But you missed a consistent in the 70s is of little interest to me, other than as maybe my 5th or 6th player in that line, rather than the 3rd or 4th. I'd rather chase ceiling. And if I nail 1 or 2 big forwards early and then I avoid them for a while and fill up on mids because there's so many there that are worth having, when I'm coming back at the end of it, I'm more likely to take who's an example? Even a Tom Lynch at Richmond, or Dixon of last year is a perfect example, or Tex
Sure.
even, where they've got that. If they kick 4 or 5 or 6 goals, that ceiling is just huge. They might drop the odd poor score, but again, particularly if you've hold them and you don't have to have that on field, happy days.
Yeah, okay, that's really good. So it's always dangerous entering into your draft day with this predetermined mindset because, like I said, the variances can happen on draft day so drastically either way. Is there a spot on draft day? Because in some leagues they let you choose, other leagues there's millions of different ways you can pick your draft spots. Let's just run the premise of the assumption of it's a 10-team league.
Sure.
Let's break them into thirds. You've kind of got picks 1 to 4, picks 5 to 7, and then picks 8 to 10. If you had a choice of which spot of those 3 you'd want to be in, is there, again, it depends on the amount of people in the league, all the squad sizes, the format, all that. But if we're just picking 10 and it's a snake draft, which of those thirds do you feel this year might have a slight advantage in contrast to maybe previous spots?
This year especially would really love to be in that sort of first 1 or 2 picks.
Okay, because a lot of people
3
are
or
saying
4 to a degree.
Yeah, a lot of people seem to be thinking 4, maybe even 5, where you pick up the crumbs from the table. Why are you so bullish on that top end and ultimately what you get back on the turn?
I would say it's about the next turn is where that is.
Right.
I think the top sort of probably 6 or 7, you're not going to be upset. Even, realistically at pick 9, you're not going to be upset with the guy you pick. The top handful. That's it. Happy day. You're going to be happy with whatever you land. But it's more about having ideally, if you get pick 1, I think this is a really good year to get pick 1, to be honest, in that not just because of pick 1 and getting the player that you want more than any other. You love Jack Steele, happy days. If you're in love with Petrarca, enjoy. If you want to take Gorn, whatever. There's arguments to be made for any one of them, but it's coming back at the other end and getting players, number 20 and 21. That's where I think the real value is, more so than getting the double at 10, 11 and then having to wait until the end of the 3rd round before you get another pick.
Yeah, I really like, because our friends at the Draft Doctors have this brilliant tool with the mock draft simulator. Again, depending on the intensity of the type of league you're in, of if draft is their thing, or they just do it for fun with the mates, or it's the side chips on their fantasy footy season, depending on how much focus they have. A tool like that is very much the hardcore coach that's drafting over and over and over, that helps you with some ADPs. But even using that as the example, we're seeing guys like Andy Brayshaw be a guy that you can get if you're on that back end of the 2nd round. You're able to get an Andy Brayshaw at the back of the 2nd, front end of the 3rd. And that does feel like, regardless of the format you play, a player like him or a Petrarca at that point on the draft, there's some big wins there, even if it means you are missing out on Duncan, Taranto, Dunkley, Lloyd, Whitfield types.
That's it. And I'm happy, I think, this year especially, to miss out on one of them at this point. Take 2 or 3 of the next best options, in the 4th or 5th sort of round. But make sure that I can set up that initial core of the team in those first 3 rounds. If 3 picks inside 21 to me sounds a lot better than having to wait a bit longer.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. And is that would you have the same approach, again, just to kind of sidestep to a keeper league?
Yeah.
And again, for Patreons, you can go back and check. Kane and I created a top 50 keeper ranks and built them into about 8 or 9 tiers. So you can go and check that out. Patreons get that as a part of there. But for you this year, looking at again, it all depends on amount of teams, amount of on field, amount you keep in your league, amount you hold on as keepers. So that's always the big caveat. But again, using those 3 spots for a brand new keeper, is it a same spot for you? You'd rather that first choice rather than the see what crumbs off that top tier?
On face value, I think so this year, to be honest. I mean, especially with a keeper, the guys you pick in those first few rounds are players that you want to be holding for a long, long time. And getting the option to get the player you want more than any other straight off the bat, that's worth something, I think. That it makes your heart feel good when you log in and see your team. That's nice.
I think that's what you are looking for in a keeper league, isn't it?
That's it. You want players you own, players you enjoy having on your team. You don't want to own Jake Stringer there. You don't want to. No offense, Jack.
No, not at all.
No, but
your point is,
unless you love him, you might be an Essendon fan and you're all over that scene. That's fine. Good for you.
We'll pray for you later.
I don't
that's
want
fine.
that.
But
yeah, that's it. I'd rather log in and see
point.
Taron Thomas and Sam Walsh and go, yes, I've set my team up very nicely there. So
it is the enjoyment piece.
Absolutely.
Is probably there more than because a single season league, you could say you're getting to round 6, round 7, round 8, let alone the teen rounds and go, look, the guy's just there. I have to take him.
Yeah.
Even if it's not a player, you use a player example, you get to round 12. Jake String is the name we've already used again. It's not a pile on. It's just using him as an illustration point.
Of course.
But
there are a lot of other names we could have used there. In fairness,
it's just more for sake of it. Is you
first one that came to mind.
Correct. It was a friend of mine, mate. That's why. And you just went. I get to round 12. I really only have one good forward. Okay, the value far outweighs my. Yeah, I don't like it. Sort of pick. Whereas in a single season league, it's all about these next 22 weeks, and it's not it's all just about the premiership in that year, not the dynasty of the list build
that's it
that you're going about trying to make. So speaking of keeper leagues, again, people are at this point in time doing their redraft of keeper leagues. So again, some keep 10, some keep 6, some keep 20, some keep 35, and each has a different level of how many players you will redraft back. But if we just look at the kids for a moment, I know you and I are in a league with many of the members of the coaches panel, and we've done our redraft and maybe we've all got some more to come, but everybody knows Dacos and Horn-Francis. I think they're the consensus. It might not be accurate. That's probably the consensus of the top 2 kids to pick from this crop. Who's the next group along? And then another question off the back of that is, who are those, if you don't get a quality kid, who's something that you might pick up late as a flyer that could really pop for you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's so many articles out there on the rookie kids to watch this year, and most of them are going to probably give you a little more detail or accurate sort of idea than I would. But I really like Erasmus this year. I think he's got something special about him. Ward's been talked about a lot.
Hawthorn,
Yep, at Hawthorn, Hobbs as well. And Sin at Port is the other one that I really, really like. They're probably the next little group for mine. Rochelle at Adelaide is probably, if not in that group, very, very close to it too.
Right up on it. Where's Callaghan in contrast to that group? Because again, some people follow it really closely and follow the junior numbers, and others just go, I'll mimic the AFL draft as long as they're not key position players. Where does he sit? Because I've seen him go in that top 6, because I think you're right. That's kind of that top crew. And the first non-mid is Rochelle or Rochelle. Where does Callaghan sit? Because I've seen him in a bit of both.
Yeah, look, on face value, if he'd been drafted to St Kilda or North, he'd probably be in that group as well, you'd think.
Yeah, right.
It's and it might be a flawed way of thinking, but I look at where some of the other really talented ball winners that have been drafted by the Giants over the last couple of years just haven't had that opportunity to stake their claim properly yet. It might take 2 years and he gets traded to Essendon or Port or Freo or wherever else, and he does get that opportunity. He might force his way in, as Tom Green has, and actually get a good chance sooner than we expect. But there's just that little more risk and that little more patience required, I think, to make him a worthwhile investment for that longer term. Which means that, if you can snag on him late in the first round or he slips even further, then happy days, by all means. Load up on that, particularly if you don't need a player to make an impact right away. But for me, he's one that I'd probably have just on the outside of that first group.
Yeah, okay. So there's a couple of the guys, again, depending on the level of research you dig deep into keeper leagues. And again, generally it's quite a standardized AFL fantasy and dream team scoring. And again, keeper leagues can be done in any of the formats that you choose to play these days. Our preference is ultimate footy, slightly biased, but we think it's got the best customizations and abilities for commissioners to really hold. Certainly not the most beautifully aesthetic looking of all of them, but we think it's the most functional off there. Everyone sees what Nick Dacos and Horn France has done. Jump on. You mentioned Ward, who's got that junior averages of well over 100. Then there's a couple of names I'd love to throw out. If you miss that 6 or 7, where's Connor McDonald? Because he's got one of the better fantasy averages, albeit he might be fighting his way back into that side. Similarly, his teammate in Ned Long.
Yeah, sure. McDonald of the two, I do like more. And I think he just needs to get his chance. And when he does get that chance, to show that he can use it well as just accumulate. I don't think Mitchell's the type that's going to suffer fools easily. And I think a team can only really have one Tom Mitchell in its side at a time. And when you've got the Tom Mitchell in your side, you're not putting another one next to him where they're just going to handball back and forth to each other all afternoon. So that's again, I might be well off the mark with that, but my first impression is, absolutely quality from a fantasy point of view, but as to when he gets his chance and to what sort of a role he gets to apply that in, I don't know. That's the question mark.
So we've talked about the Dacos, the Callahan, the Rochelle, that kind of that big 6. Maybe it's a bit loose. It's really like a big 2 or 3, and then a really good another 2 or 3 off the back.
It's a long tail this year. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a long tail. So if you are at pick 8, 7, 8, 9 on this redraft of a keeper league, at what point do you move away from a gun kid that you think you can hold? And again, I know the variance is how many you keep, how many on field, how many coaches, all of that.
Yeah. The other variance is how close do you think you are to a flag, and how much do you want to push it?
If you're at the back end of the first, you probably are having a good year. When do you move from gun kid to best in the pool that could pop for you?
Look, it might even be at that first pick that I think, and it really depends on who's in that pool and of what value they are for where you sit. In that, if you've got a player that was missed last year that could be a good option, and that someone's had to delist because they just don't want them anymore, or you've got that potential to add value to your on-field team. You don't need that long-term investment yet. Then absolutely go nuts first round. There's a lot to be said for not following the trend, and that doesn't just mean if a run on defenders starts, don't just take a defender because everyone else is. Look at what your team actually needs most, and I'd argue the same with the rookies. Each draft, each keeper redraft starts with a run on rookies. But you got to look at that objectively. Do you need one of those kids right now? Do you wait a couple of rounds and pick up a McDonald then, or someone else that might have been missed along the way, and just take the best available player in the draft straight off the bat?
Yeah, because every year we see it in keeper leagues. Again, the variance is how many you keep. But there are some keeper leagues that have had to throw back based on who they keep. Someone like a Trent Rivers, who 2 years ago people were going, oh, this is the Michael Hibberd replacement at Melbourne, and he's going to be the quarterback guy year 4, year 5. Chances are you could probably go and pick him up in your keeper redraft. There are guys that went, and again, this is probably not a good keeper league, but people that went, I hated Will Phillips last year because he was terrible from a scoring perspective, and throw him back into the pool. Again, that's the kind of keeper league I want to be in.
I would almost consider taking him with the top 5 pick this year.
Well, and that's the key, isn't it?
Yeah.
We kind of see the new draftees, and it's almost that, Callahan could be amazing, or Erasmus could be amazing. It's like, but Phillips has had an extra 12 months in the system.
Exactly.
Maybe you don't need to do it. So again, I think that's a part of all those factors and flavors that you build in to those leagues and dynasties and keeper leagues along the way. To come back to then more of a single season approach, who are those guys that you just are really bullish on this year? That again, it's all dependent on where you pick them, because the value of where you pick them is inbuilt at the point of a pick. For example, Isaac Heaney is your F1 in the 3rd round, as opposed to Isaac Heaney in your 5th or 6th round. the pop doesn't have to be as high because of where you get them. Who are those guys that for you go, look, once those opening half a dozen rounds have gone and you're starting to look for the guy that could pop, who are some guys that you're kind of going, look, it all depends where I get them, but at the right spot, I'm all on them. Who are some of the names you've got for us?
Okay. Much later than the first 4 or 5, 6 rounds, but later in the draft, Mitch Hinge is one that I'm really bullish on this year. I think he gets a really good opportunity at Adelaide in a position that he can rack up a lot of points in.
Defender eligible too. Yep.
Defender eligible. That's it. So yeah, he's one that I'm very bullish on. Looking at Richmond, I think Dion Prestia is one that needs to be 100%. Highlighted for you. He's had a lean couple of years, primarily through injury than anything else. And so that's definitely a factor there. And then beyond that, who else do I really like this year? Those Port kids that have taken that little bit of time to start scoring from a dream team point of view. They've been valuable on field, but your Butters and Georgiades even, I think, are worthwhile. Those are the sorts of players I like to look at. Those that are, those 2 or 3 years into their career that haven't quite gone yet, and people have forgotten why they were first round picks in a keeper league a couple of years ago, but have still got that real potential to just go off now. Yeah, no, I think that's really good.
So, all right. So there's a couple of, breakout-ish sort of guys. And I got 2 questions kind of off the back of that. In salary cap, it's a little different, this thought, because it's they're priced at a similar range. I'm alluding to things like where do you rank a Caleb Sarong, a Matt Crouch, and an Elliot Yeo type alongside each other? One, the third-year breakout guy, as opposed to the proven but coming back off injury. What's the determining factor for you to choose a Sarong over a Matt Crouch, or the reverse?
Yeah, I would pick Sarong over Matt Crouch comfortably coming into this year, and either of them significantly over Yeo. You talked earlier about players I don't want to draft. He's one. But the Crouch is definitely draftable for me. He's got that ceiling. He's got that potential. And I think all the noise seems to be positive at the minute that he's going to be okay this year. But for Sarong, it's that, I don't know, it's that feeling of momentum, I guess, is what I really like about a player like him. You could put Chera in the same basket, Taron Thomas that I mentioned before, Noah Anderson is another. These sort of players that are coming into, they're just starting to hit their straps properly, that they've had a year or two, a couple of preseasons to know what they're doing, to feel more comfortable in the game. They're already proven ball winners to a point. They've had those games where they've notched the 100. And they're now at that sort of age and experience and in a team in a position where they've got that potential to do it more and more regularly. Davis Uniacke is one from a few years ago now. He's a little older than some of those others, where he's been a slow burn. And for a time, you couldn't trade him for anything in a draft league because people had written him off. Now he's coming off a year where he averaged 80 or so. But in those last handful of rounds, he was going at 90. I think he had 110, 115 in one of the last couple of rounds there. So, and North with that midfield improving significantly, and players like Zeeble not in it, they're in a different part of the ground. He's got that space and time to become that player that can accumulate and through the middle. So that's the sort of player I really enjoy drafting. You're taking a bit of a punt on them, but you get enough of those right as you M sort of 3 or 4 through to the tail. You find yourself significantly placed picking up those guys that are capable of 100 average or close to it. By getting them later and filling up on forwards and backs, or and it might be the forwards and backs where you see potential for that type of player. That there's different angles to go with it, but they're the sort that I like to get a little bit after the big names, so to speak, have already been taken.
So you mentioned
Liam Shields is an example. Sorry, I'll just go back.
Go with Shields.
Liam Shields is an example of that guy that I hate drafting, because he's that guy that's going to score you 75 to 85 almost every week. And he'll probably average around that mark for the season, but just doesn't seem to have much of that ceiling about him anymore. And the older he gets and the more that Hawthorn rejuvenate, the less comfortable I feel about his place in the 22, much as he might be a leader of sorts at the club, and that he's been there for, he's been well established there. But at some point, Hawthorn have got to look at it and go, do we want to give Liam Shields a game, or do we want to give Connor McDonald a game with a view to contending in 2 or 3 years' time? And I'm not picking Shields in that situation. So that's I guess a little bit behind my thought process, I suppose.
No, it's good, and I think it's important. It's not just telling people what to do, where to pick them, how to pick them. It's the mindset to help challenge or encourage a current way of thinking. Both are helpful in the preseason. All right, one last question before we wrap up the episode. And by the way, around about the time of the Queen's birthday long weekend, our Patreons are going to get access to Jimmy's draft rankings. So you can go and I know there's some others that have got some great draft kits out there, so you can go and check them out too. But a great exclusive for our Patreons only is you'll get an opportunity to check it out. And if you wish to, draft with Jimmy's draft rankings. So you can just draft as well as the good man as he does every single year if you want to go and draft off that. But
Premiership's not guaranteed, just quietly. But
no. You meant to say it is, mate. That's how we get people signing up. But that's fine. I appreciate the humility that is there.
The refunds that you're paying out in September, I'm not sure are worth the sign-ups you're getting in March.
Fair shout. Okay, fair shout. Yeah, there'll be no coachespanel.tv in September because we've had to pay out.
That's it. We've taken the money and run. That's what we've done. That's how this works, isn't it?
Yeah, that's totally how this is working. One last question, because you mentioned a few guys there that ended the season well. So Tyron Thomas, Luke Davies-Uniacke, Fiorini. These are the guys that stormed home last year, were given opportunities and thrived. How much do you read into an end of a season, and even, I suppose, alongside that, the preseason hype that we see through these intra-club and practice games? Do either of them have a greater say or sway to you?
End of season weighs more to me than preseason does. In both, though, I think you've got to look at who was actually playing in those games and did that contribute to those scores. We look at these preseason games now, and there's a lot of players that aren't playing, and then you see others step up and assume that role and score those points accordingly, and that gets everybody very excited. That may or may not eventuate come round one. It could be a very different lineup we're seeing, and those players aren't given that same amount of midfield rotation or aren't kicking the same volume of goals because they're not in the position to do so. They might not be playing at all. So I think there is a lot that needs to be read into that, but a strong form line to finish the year is certainly valuable, I think, from where I'm sitting in terms of what that sort of indicates about the player's role in a side that theoretically is fully strength or close to it, more so than a practice game where, as the great Dane Swan only tweeted a day or two ago to remind us that, in his view, the players that tried hard in preseason were mostly the ones that were worried about whether they'd get a game in round one, rather than perhaps himself, as he might have suggested, that didn't give us stuff until Anzac Day. So it's that's preseason games do, I think, need to be taken a lot with a grain of salt. And as we've said, rollover points is the key thing there. And our premiums, they just need to get through the game unscathed. That's it. And not be completely so far out of position that we have to start asking questions as to why.
I think that's really, really good advice. Hey, Jimmy, mate, appreciate your work because you've given us a little bit of insight into some draft strategies, some specific players for single and keeper leagues, and just some of your wisdom as we enter into draft season. Thank you, mate.
No, look, anytime, mate. Happy to help.
If you want to go and check out any of our draft content that has been dropping right throughout the preseason, those rankings for Keeper League, stuff that we mentioned as tiers from Kane and I, a bunch of other stuff is there at coachespanel.tv. All of your salary cap content, strategies, player reviews, all also at coachespanel.tv. Right throughout the preseason, we've still got podcasts dropping every couple of days to help you make the most informed decisions about the fantasy format you choose to play and help you make great decisions along the way. We wish you all the best, and we can't wait to chat to you the next time here. From everyone at the Coaches Panel, good luck. We'll chat to you soon.